The right-hand side would be east along with the house chambers. So there's that two location. If you went and left the window exposed to the card room, that would be just under 140 square feet, roughly a little bit smaller than what was presented up by the cafeteria. So the other location for the wall is the opposite side of the window. It is roughly 8 inches or so from the jamb of leaving the house chamber and entering into the card room. So it does fit quite well. It almost comes to, or will come to the end of the ramp railing. So that'll nicely block that whole area off. It does, some lights have to be relocated. There's some can lights that are situated as you're going up to the ramp to the right of it, just off-centered of the railing. So we'd have to pull those back in. I don't know what's above the ceiling. So they could be moved the 6 inches. They have to be moved and or moved a complete 2 feet and be centered onto the ramp. We would investigate that. There's only got one outlet in the room in the corner, in the northeast corner. So we'd have to bring in at least 2 additional outlets. We'd have to add, there's some track lighting in there and some additional can lighting. So we need some rework some of the switches so that, if you're entering the card room or exiting, the lights go out. They don't go out in that room also. Vice versa, you can turn the lights on in the room. And I plan on adding possibly 2 light fixtures. Not sure if they're completely needed, but I'm not 100% sure at this point. So I threw those in. The wall length is a bit longer than what we were looking at in this morning's version over by the cafeteria. And so the cost increases because basically the wall length. We've come up with a nice little detail at the handrail. It would be nice to sort of leave a gap that fits the ceiling and the lighting better. However, I can just envision somebody dropping their phone or anything else in that 4-inch gap. And so we put it tight to the railing. There is an induction unit, which is similar to what we have throughout the whole house rooms. And there's one on each end of the room, one on the north side, one on the south side. On the south side, we're coming in from the Cedar Creek room. It's just on your left-hand side. So dividing that room, air handling wise, works. Lighting can work. Everything basically works well to go in that space. And it is, Steve, you're on the square footage of the larger?
208 square feet.
To 208 square feet. So it nicely fits, 2 office desks and a small table with chairs.
And 2 windows.
Mm-hmm.
How big was this one?
No, I do not have a copy. I'm not sure if Mike has received the copy yet.
No.
Just got it, just posted it and cutting it up.
No, the one we looked at earlier, how big was it?
That was roughly 144 square feet.
So this is a little bigger.
Yeah, yes, it is.
170, I thought. The other one,
I thought it was
Well,
172. Anyway, this is 20 something.
this is 208. So would you put up a partial wall or would you do floor to ceiling?
I would do floor to ceiling. I would have done that also in the other room. It was a thought that we threw out, but if you really wanted a quiet space, floor to ceiling is the way to go. It's also easier to anchor it that way.
And what's the cost?
Rough figures right now that I'm looking at is probably 8,500 to 10,000, 10,500, that ballpark. I'm not sure what I would do with the rug at this point.
Leave it.
Yeah, I don't want to cut holes in it to anchor the base of the wall. So there's things like that that would have to be worked out, but it's in that ballpark.
Okay, discussion.
Time frame?
Same as the others, right?
You want it when you move in, right? You show up. So I believe it can be done. I mean, the materials that we're looking for are basically off the shelf items. So it's nothing that takes any long lead or any rebalance or anything like that we have to do. There's a smoke detector that we have to add. That would have been in both situations. But there's an electrician.
There we are.
Okay, so Janet,
Oh, well, I guess if I look up there, I'll see it. I was wondering where the door is, because if people
the
Are-
ramp.
By the ramp.
wanting to have a private conversation, you don't have everybody in, if you've got, I don't know how many people are lined up to see you at any given time, but I'm trying to think where they will be. Is that something you can help us with, Mike?
So there is open space in that card room on the other side of where this is. If you look down by that fireplace, the existing thermostat. In the 4 years I've been here, I haven't seen a huge waiting line for me. We usually go to the lounges to help out on Friday with expenses. Mariah, Charlene, and I go into the lounge so that people can stay there. I'm trying to think if I've ever had a line to see me before. It's not so much of a line as much as it's just a constant rotation of folks. Yeah.
Mike, Mark, O'Grady, I know you're O'Grady, I confuse
Could this
you.
work be rolled into the 2-4 to expedite it? Or the two-way can work? That's gonna happen?
Oh, you mean for the contract?
Yeah, just to expedite it?
So that would be through Sergeant Arms. For that.
No, without review by another committee,
Yeah, we
not on
can't,
our say so, no.
Yeah.
right. This would be a recommendation that we would then make to management committee. The management committee is the ultimate decider. We can give our recommends. We could prioritize the spaces. We could, or coalesce around one space or two spaces, whatever. Butch?
I was wondering what the motion was to the management committee when you asked for the thing. Was it specific or was it just?
It was to do 2 and
Just,
or
I thought there was some state house.
It was,
State house
it was 2 and 4 and then State House renovation.
so as a member of the management committee, I would say that if the sergeant at arms expanded the work to include this, that would be beyond what we thought we were going to. Right.
So it would take a subsequent action. But it might be within the 750,000. But it would need a subsequent action to allow up to 10,000 or whatever of that 750 to be used. That's how I would envision it. Is that fair? Allison?
So Jill, I'm just wondering with your floor to ceiling walls, prefab walls, or whatever you,
So these would be metal studs and sheet rock.
okay. So would there be any way to have some light come through? Because those 2 windows are pretty important to that space. Is there any way to do glass or poly, a hard plastic, those really tough, great hard plastics at the top?
We do show on the sort of the bottom side of the room a piece of a transom, and that was included in the estimate. So it's like 2 feet tall from the edge of the door, centered in the wall. So if you look at the bottom, it does show that. It's an extra dark line in the middle of the wall between the door and the wall going to the past chamber. So it is a high piece of glass that would help. And Steve and I looked at it and said that the window that is closest in the corner there would allow the most light to come through
Yeah.
the card room, and the back would not, and probably would not make it to the ramp either. So that's why we selected this location.
Right, so it doesn't feel too claustrophobic for everybody.
Right. Janet?
So, so I like this idea better than the cafeteria proposal. But I'm still left, I think on balance, I think the mezzanine makes more sense, and I'm trying to sort of clarify my thinking about it. We're gonna be at a premium for elbow space, for just being in a building and close to one another, and the more space we hold on to for members and members of the public and press and so on to be able to maneuver, I think the better for us all. So I think it's just based on that, that although I think I appreciate this, I think it works. I still think the mezzanine's a better choice.
Folks, aren't we just creating options and identifying options? Because I think this is a strong option. And only for a year or two. And when we talk temporary, are we talking Because I wanted to ask you this, Madam Chair, earlier. For me, temporary is, and, you know, I guess we all have different notions of temporary. And I guess my question is, are we thinking temporary until we build
No.
and renovate? Or are we temporary until post-pandemic?
Temporary for this coming session. I don't think we can think beyond this coming session at this point in
Okay.
terms of what is temporary. I think the next step for our committee at some point in the fall, I do want to take a break. I do like seeing you every week. It's been pleasant, but I think we need a break. Our next step would be to work on space as we go forward. That's going to take some work, but I think we made this decision, our first meeting back at the end of June, that what was facing us first was this August 15th deadline in terms of recommendations for this upcoming session, in terms of how we come back into the building, if we come back into the building, in terms of what we do. I cannot see these changes that we're proposing for January 2022 to be hopefully any longer than this session of 22, because they're so disruptive to the work in the State House. Period. That's my personal feeling. I hope that COVID goes away. I hope we can
It's not, yeah.
squish the virus, suppress it so it's not active.
Just my impression though, when we're talking about metal studs and moving lights and electric, it doesn't sound temporary to me.
Oh, that's the world of BGS.
I just.
Put it in, take it out.
Yeah, we do that a lot.
How do you do that? If you said we would put it on top of the carpet?
Well, that's what I'd have to think through a little bit more, is, with that carpet, how I would do that, and maybe that
Special carpet.
some of it has to be pulled back.
One of the things that
That particular carpet actually has been slated for replacement.
Oh,
when I put, a
Right.
wall with metal studs, the first thing I did is drive nails through into the floor.
We do that. I mean, I'm not being flippant, but in the world of BGS and construction, it happens all the time.
I believe it's acoustical tile ceilings too, so you can move them pretty freely above the space of the
We
plenum.
do that quite often.
I'm kind of in Janet's camp though. Makes more sense to use the space we have up there in the mezzanine.
Joe and then Butch.
So I'm gonna push back to that philosophy, because if we focus on the mezzanine first, that brings back the need for legislative counsel to make decisions on who they're hiring,
right.
when they're hiring, and where they will be placed. This space remains an empty parcel of real estate if we don't utilize it. It avoids any confrontation with ledge counsel. It accommodates the needs of the staff who will be in there, and it is temporary. I think that raises it, in my eyes, to the top of the priority list, because it brings the less angst. And we are going to be squeezed in the building no matter what. But hopefully the other measures we are taking are going to decrease the number of people who are determined to be here and have less foot traffic in the building than we normally do. So if I was to vote right now, I would vote to have this as the top priority. If we're going to give options to the Joint Legislative Management Committee, I would prefer this be the first option.
Butch.
So I think Joe covered it for me quite nicely. Thank you. In this action, and then this takes care of the problem of the statement that we were going to make about not being able to use the card room for displays this year, should we decide to do this.
So can I have a show of hands, just so that we can get this off the table? I'm going to start with the cafeteria space first. How many folks, this is a straw poll, how many folks are being supportive of the cafeteria space? Raise your hand.
Such enthusiasm.
0.
Yeah, I think we moved on.
How many do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
I don't know.
6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. The numbers always change. Okay.
And we don't have anybody by Zoom, right, Mike?
No, we don't have anybody by Zoom. So that's for the cafeteria. Now I'm going to go to the mezzanine.
So
how many folks would be in support of looking at the mezzanine? Now, remember, these are recommendations. We're not going to make the final decision, okay? To use that front part of the mezzanine space for legislative operations. Allison?
I just have the nice thing about if we did the card room for Mike and Peggy, Shoddy, there is probably enough space in the mezzanine now for a good sized space for Shoddy. And just having come from a Shoddy to see all the stuff that's there, and John.
And John.
It's like, oh, maybe he does need a little more space. So there would
Oh,
be.
John's taken up a lot.
No. That there would be plenty of, I think, in addition to the clerks and the interns, there would be enough space for Shoddy to be in the mezzanine, which would be great. So I just wanted to say, I think that's the other plus of this, is that it leaves room for Shoddy in the mezzanine.
Joe?
Madam Chair, in my discussions with my committee last session, I've always endeavored to try to take into account the opinions of the people that are going to be working in the space that we're talking about.
Right.
And I'm just wondering if it would be out of line before we call for a vote on
Oh, yes, good.
2, whether Michael should be asked if he personally had a preference.
That he said that he did.
He preferred the card room. I thought you said, Mike.
I think you prefer.
I would prefer the card room setup that Joe and I just looked at over the mezzanine.
Would there be a possibility that Sade could go up into that mezzanine spot with that wooden desk there on the left?
The mezzanine spot.
For Sade?
I don't see why not, but I wouldn't presume to speak for another department.
Right. So for that space there on the left-hand side, you go into the mezzanine to be used for legislative operations. Those in favor, please raise your hand. Your hand. 1, 3, and I'm conflicted.
Hey, we're talking about the card room now.
No, the mezzanine.
I was mistaken.
I'm conflicted. So I would assume the rest of you, right?
Well, we're trying to be flexible, so it might be option 2. Option 1 is card room for me.
So the card room, trying to renovate that section of the card room temporarily for office space for legislative operation. How many of those in favor? Okay, all those opposed?
Yeah, it's like option
Yeah.
2.
9-2. So it would be fair to say that we are very supportive of converting that section of the card room for legislative operations. We had a real discussion about the mezzanine. And would it be fair to say when this is presented to the management committee that we have not resolved where to shot it, where he should operate, that there could be a possibility of doing both the card room and the mezzanine? Or is that going to add confusion?
I'm not sure they looked at it for 3 places. They didn't. They only did 2 places for the card room. That wasn't.
Walls or anything like that.
I don't think there would need to be walls. I don't think there would need to be walls.
Shoddy would just need a workstation.
They have
There are
a
workstations.
workstation there. Which,
So I might be a bit confused.
Yeah.
We looked at the vacated space that might just vacated, hopefully.
for a cold room?
Yeah, for the coat room, we picked a post down there. So this would be the end of the coat room. And that was,
And the bathroom.
and that was, and so the bathroom, if you're looking down at the single stall bathroom would be on the left, the shoddy space would still be available.
In the back by,
He's on the other side of the, I think,
Yeah, he is. He's on the right side.
post, because that we went down far enough to get that door in.
oh, so there's an option Shotty could stay where he is?
I'm not sure. I think you can.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
That would require a wall and a door. Because we cannot have our laptops viewable by people dumping their coats in that.
Oh, we need that anyway.
Yeah.
To demarcate the end of the coat room. It's a public area, it has to be separated from the offices that are further back. So we need the door and the wall anyway.
And I did not put an estimate together for that.
No, we get that. Yeah, I mean, you were there with us and pointed out how you put that door in because it was a door at one time. So, yeah.
I'll say.
Oh, Anthony.
Just to be clear, Shadi is a member of Mike's team, right?
No, he's a member of
That's with Kevin.
IT team. I was just gonna say that I don't know whether we should wrangle too long over where one
Yeah.
person does their job. I
I
think leave it
agree.
up to his boss to decide where he goes.
Right, I agree.
So our priority for legislative operations, which is Mike and whomever, and Peggy, is what we've decided would be the card room. That's our first priority. The second's the mezzanine. And cafeteria didn't even get off the ground. So when it's presented to joint management, basically it's the card room and the mezzanine. And we gave a look at the cafeteria and really decided that was not workable. Is that fair to say? Okay, you hold me to it, both you two. Give me backup. Thank you, Joe.
I want to add one other item.
Uh-oh.
Of cost, because it's temporary. There's no,
Oh,
in
we
that,
gotta
in that cost. there's no
decommission.
cost, right?
Yeah, that's what I
So
was gonna ask about.
there'll be a little bit more after that.
At some point, you have to take it out.
Yes, if you want me to.
I think we will. Okay,
Demo, I love a demo.
great, thank you.
Is that a segue to talk about placement of the coat room? Might have-
Well, it might be, sure. I mean, did we, it's all part of the report. I've read this report, but I don't remember where the coat room issue.
It was, let's see. Are we gonna go through it bit by bit?
We will, but we've got some danglers here where we've got, we do. Did we, I'm gonna ask Ellen, did we address the coat room in this report anywhere?
On page 14, there's a, might include some sort of.
Yes, okay.
Some loose language.
Yep.
that needs further discussion.
Let's not, do folks want to take care of this right now, or do we want to go to the purifiers? I'm flexible.
Let's deal with the purifiers and then deal with this as we go through it.
Purifiers, Matt?
Yeah, so. Back up here. So Janet communicates that in her previous conversations with the environmental expert from BGS, the air purifiers, like what you heard running earlier, may help with the health of the rooms, may not, it's always may. It is running now on the low setting. So these that we have three settings. That's the medium. A little more obtrusive, probably still dealable maybe, depending on what you're doing. And then the high version would probably be what you would put it on when you're taking the work to run through the air. A little quicker, but it's been running. It was running all morning on low.
We didn't notice.
and didn't even notice it. So I think that's a recommendation that we put them in. It does take up space, although, and I think we can be a little creative about maybe where we put it in the rooms.
On the ceiling?
I don't think we can hang them from the ceiling. I think David might have some heartache over that. And she did want to just remind everyone that it's a single tool in a suite of interventions we need to be doing to be healthier as individuals and collectively. Washing our hands, staying home when we're sick, not hacking and yakking on our neighbors, and doing the smart things to keep ourselves healthy. And that may, we may have to come back and talk about masking again, depending on where things go. Anecdotally, I think we probably have enough masks on hand right now to get us through a goodly bit of the legislative session, but that'll be I think that's a in my parlance, that's a kind of a tactical decision that gets made much closer to when things are happening. And it needs to be, we need to be responsive and flexible to raise and lower our posture as we go.
Allison?
So Matt, does every room need this or just the house committees that don't have the air issues?
I think you ought to put it in all the committee rooms. Anywhere you're concentrating people, I think should have these.
But the hallways,
No, I'm sure. I don't think I think in the halls they become obstructions and tripping problems.
about the chambers.
I think so.
Are they big enough to actually accommodate the house chamber?
You gotta have a few of them,
As we might have bigger models.
or you have a few of them.
Or a few, yeah.
John?
How do they actually work?
No idea.
What side, what are they designed to remove?
I think they are, MERV 13s,
I think so.
HEPA filters, so it's basically like an N95 filter.
So does that mean it would remove viral particles or not?
Without looking up the data on that, I don't want to tell you yes, but it's likely to, especially considering that you're not usually dealing with viral particles floating around on their own. They're on a carrier, a droplet of saliva or what have you. That's what usually gets things caught up in filters. I don't think they make a filter small enough to filter the actual viral particle, because you wouldn't be able to move air through it. You wouldn't be able to move air through it sufficiently to be effective.
Does it draw from the floor or from the top? And
It's outputting about mid-level. I think it's drawing from the lower area and pushing out.
so in a committee room, would it go under the tables or does it then become not effective if it's not?
I think you'd want a little bit of space around it, so we may find a area to put it in. Again, I think this is so dependent on the room, on where we're going. I didn't put it there out of any special placement today. I put it there because it was in the way. I put it there so it would be in the way in the middle of everything, so we could hear it if it was going to be obnoxious.
Is it a manual for the different speeds, or does it adjust? So it doesn't adjust automatically to what's in the room?
And remember, it's not putting new oxygen or fresh air or anything like that in. It's just cleaning the air that's in there.
And circulating it. It would help to make people feel better sitting in the room, may not make them, the building safer, but it may help people feel more comfortable in the room, knowing that there's something
I'll be more awake too.
more awake.
And to an extent, again, this is a part of that suite of
Tools.
things that we use. And every tool gives you, I think it's a viable benefit to have. I mean, there's some tools that sure we can do and they have a little bit of benefit, but maybe not really. I think this is a viable step for the committee. I don't think they're too expensive, weren't you?
They were not.
Let Joe look that up.
Online, $849.99. Why now?
I'm like,
850.
Do I hear 810?
Allison, then Janet.
So I'm just curious, how do we know they actually work and aren't just making noise to make us feel good? I mean, what do we see? What's the tangible result? Sort of to go to John's questions. What's the tangible result we see that it's working, like filthy filter papers or?
I suspect you would see that. I've not taken one apart. I was told I was on the agenda last night.
Do we have to change the filters on a regular basis? Is that what happened?
Another job for somebody else. Always go.
the filters don't get changed, how could it work?
All right.
Yeah, they would clearly need.
So Janet and then Joe.
Well, so I don't know enough about, you say it's a viable thing, I don't know what the word you used. But I don't have any sense about what the benefit is, and we don't have a lot of space in our committee rooms. And especially if it needs to be somewhere where there's air circulating around it, that takes up, I can't see it from here, but that means it needs more than the unit space to actually be functional. So it would be helpful to know more about it.
I definitely don't think you want to stick it in a corner where you're obstructing the airflow, but I also don't know that you have to, I mean.
But all we have is.
All we have is corners.
I mean, the rooms are teeny.
Under the table.
Well, and to be perfectly honest with you, under a table may function well. We need a little time to look at placement and understand that a little better. But I think especially if you're looking at the limitation of occupancy in the rooms, I think you're going to find room for one of those. Depending on.
They're gonna be in the way of where people walk to get to their seat. Because the only thing available is behind the person who's testifying, or in the space between the committee chairs of the members and the people who are sitting. And some committees, there isn't even much room behind the chair and the vice chair. Like I'm thinking of Commerce Committee, I'm thinking of Judiciary Committee.
No room in mine.
Right, I mean, those are the committee rooms that would be used. Appropriations Committee, Health and Welfare, I mean, Human Services.
That's why I asked about under the table, whether it could go under the table. 'cause
Yeah, if
Yeah,
there's,
they could go under the table.
That means
There's a
that
type
probably
that
the
goes
clerk
under a table.
has to crawl under to turn it on and on.
no, but some of the committee rooms, what table would you put it under? Because everybody's sitting at something.
So if
Well, there's lots of space.
I had Joe and then Butch.
I feel, Madam Chair, like we're dancing along the edge of our marching orders. We were charged with making recommendations on space and design proposals. This piece of technology is something brand new to us. And as we have been sitting as a committee, the IT equipment has changed radically over that short period of time. I have no problem making a recommendation to JLMC that they consider charging the committees of jurisdiction with investigating whether or not these are the best items, and if so, how or where they should be used. But I'm a little nervous about going beyond that and making a recommendation that this specifically should be used, because we don't have anybody here to answer some basic questions, like what good are they? We just don't.
Right.
I apologize for not being fully versed on this. I didn't quite understand what I was going to have to deal with this today, so.
So I guess I'm a little telepathic with Joe, but I seem to agree. And then when you think of one unit at, let's rough it out at $1,000. And there's 26 committee rooms. That's a number that we really, I think we need to know more about it before we start spending a lot of money on it. But that's a number that we just spent $10,000 on. That I don't want to seem frugal about it, but I want to understand that we're really getting what we think we're getting.
Janet?
Well, and it's not just 26, I don't think, because if they are worth having, then I'd want to think about them where people work as well. Not just where committees are meeting. So, but I just don't have any sense about whether they just make people have a false sense of security or whether they're actually going to make a difference.
Perhaps the recommendation would be to produce more information and investigation into the use of air purifiers in respective spaces.
It's great.
Might look at whether or not there's versions that are wall mounted or ceiling mounted too. That would take care of some of the space issues.
So I'm hearing we give a nod to it and we make a recommendation that the joint management committee at least vet it a little further. I think this is me personally. Just knowing what our colleagues are thinking in some conversations we've had with colleagues, if we don't address this some way in our report, people are going to say, well, what about air purifiers?
Right.
To look at that. So I think we need to make a statement that there's more to this conversation than we had information for, and that we would make a recommendation that the management committee or whomever do a little deeper dive here to see if this is workable for committee rooms, but also looking at space needs for our staff as well. Alan?
So Mike O'Grady did propose some language beginning right at the bottom of page 14 onto the top of page 15, and I think it's pretty close to what you just mentioned, but you may want to whittle it down a little bit. It's the yellow.
Oh, prior to updating the HVAC system.
Oh, yeah, because
Review, yeah, but it's not really connected to the HVAC system per se.
But until the HVAC system is fixed, it would really make people feel good to know that if it works, that there's an air purifier in a room. Don't you think?
So review would include the evaluation of whatever, of portable air purifier units, noise generated, and overall determination of the benefit and detriments. The units.
Just remove the opening clause of that sentence.
Prior to updating the HVAC system.
Well, and expand the legislative committee.
Committee rooms.
Just,
So it would start, the committee recommends,
right, so is that what Steve's suggesting? I think that's good.
and then we expand legislative committee room to also include our legislative staff.
Committee rooms and other spaces.
And workspace, whatever.
Is it going to be a separate section then? Is that what you said? It would be separated from the HVAC paragraph?
What it would be, no, it's at the very last line on page 14 where it starts in yellow prior to updating the HVAC system. You just write that. You start the paragraph with the committee recommends.
Yeah, I think John's asking, are we separating it from the HVAC conversation,
Oh,
making a separate?
I would suggest that it's a separate thought.
yeah.
They might still be even after HVAC.
23 recommends. Okay, John?
One other thing that this kind of is a fact-free conversation, but one issue another thing we don't know is what the effectiveness is at the different speeds. Like running at low, is it doing anything useful at all? Does it have to run on high if you've got a bunch of people before it's effective? We don't have any idea. And if it has to run on high, then we can't use it. If it's very effective on low, then it sounds great.
So you would add another
I'm not
clause
sure, I'm
in
not
there
sure what I
about-
would add, but we just haven't, I'm just, I guess emphasizing again that we're having a fact-free conversation.
I think though the last clause actually covers your concern, John.
The noise generated.
She has to make a determination, benefit and detriments of the units.
Yes.
I think that says it.
Other folks? So Alan, are you clear? So we strike out prior to updating the HVAC system in the State House, and then we set up on number 23. Anything else? We didn't really clarify the use of the cafeteria. And we haven't clarified the use of the Cedar Creek one. We've sort of talked about what the cafeteria can be used for. I don't know if we need further conversations, and I don't know if we need further conversations about the Cedar Creek one. So I'm open to suggestions. See,
I agree. I think we've done a nice job on the cafeteria, Cedar Creek room. The only one that we didn't, piece of the use that we did not talk about was it's often used for press conferences.
Right.
So we touch on advocacy, we touch on receptions, but we don't touch on press conferences. That seems to be when it's actually most packed full of people.
Did you want to add something?
Oh, see, I just had a real nitpicky thing. The cafeteria, we talked about limiting it to one event in the morning and one event in the afternoon.
I think.
Like I said, it's pretty nitpicky. It's just.
I think the afternoon, we were interpreting those 4:30 receptions that are held in the Cedar Creek room
Right.
would be held in the cafeteria.
Right.
That's how we were interpreting that. We may need clarification in the report on that.
Add the word late.
Late
Late
afternoon.
And evening, because remember the lieutenant governor had been using it in the evenings.
All right, for the movies.
And there are many things that go into the evening there. So you might. I think it's probably worth just saying something easy.
Can you hold on to that thought for when we get there to the report? Maybe we can wordsmith that language.
My scribe is writing it down.
Okay.
Yeah, got it.
So it's in there, okay. Press conference. Cedar Creek, should we limit the number of folks in that room? Should we, what do we do? Just let it be silent on it? Press conferences can continue there?
Thanks, Chief. On page 10, line 7. Be clear. Presentations or receptions. Receptions.
Does that include press conferences?
I'd be if you think we should be more specific, we could be.
Yeah, and in reading that was the question that came up to me, was I saw them as three, I read them as three different things.
Should not be used for presentation or reception. Does a press conference mean a presentation?
So do you split the baby further and differentiate between you holding a press conference and
Anybody else?
Ducks Unlimited Club of West Berlin? As far as I know, there's not such a club. That's why I use it.
But I think the majority are booked by members, often on behalf
Right,
of,
that's true.
often on behalf of
Right.
I guess
other groups.
that's the differentiation. Do we recommend not doing that unless it is the member, or lieutenant governor, whatever? Do you differentiate those two kinds of press conferences?
Or we just say we don't do them.
We don't.
Well,
Yeah,
That
but
room.
it's kind of hard to tell people that you can't do a press conference anywhere in the State House. Unless if they can't do it in Cedar Creek room, they gotta do it somewhere. Otherwise, it's gonna be, people are gonna really say it's a First Amendment thing.
And I think the Cedar Creek room is well suited just for press conferences for the next year. I just think we might want to limit the number and make it fairly straightforward. But I think it is well suited for, and we could just, I mean, we might ask the sergeant at arms to think about how many make sense, but one in the morning, one in the afternoon, or whatever. I don't think we need to micromanage it, but I think it is suitable for press conferences, and really otherwise they're going to be in the hall somewhere and be in the way.
They are in the way if you are a house member. I mean, that's where we walk. That's just the reality of them.
Right.
They're in a hallway. in the Cedar Creek room.
But you could put them at one end or another.
As a person who walks through there a lot, you're walking through a lot of people.
So is it your vote that we terminate them?
I would discourage the Cedar Creek room for press conferences. I think we need to, it may be the lobby may be a better space. I mean, there may be other spaces that are better, but I don't think the Cedar Creek room is.
So the plus, Janet, is that the challenge with the lobby down here is now it's committee rooms on either side. So if you're gonna have a press conference, that'll be interrupting committee time. I mean, it'll be noisy. So the plus of the Cedar Creek room, if you can maybe limit the numbers, is that it's not, you don't have committee rooms meeting on either side of them. It's the noise isn't as, now the noise will be right outside if you do them down here.
Well, it's not really
Butch.
bigger.
So thank
Butch and then Josh.
So we've been very, very careful all the way through this about when we've talked about trying to establish a reasonable number of people within the building in all of our discussions. And we've done suggestions like fannies and seats. That's how many people you could get in your committee room. We've done all that. A press conference in the Cedar Creek room. And my experience that I have many times trying to get to the well, I either have to come all the way around the backside and come through the speaker's office area, or go downstairs and back upstairs because you can't get through the Cedar Creek room for press conference. So we've asked people, basically we were asking people to give us some space to work. But you have a press conference, and especially an advocacy press conference, you're gonna have 100 people in that room. And I doubt that anybody wants to police that. And we all seen 100 people in that room for a press conference. And I just, under today's conditions.
Are they gonna show up or not?
Yeah.
John and then Nat.
I was just gonna point out that the lobby really isn't significantly larger, so I don't know that it solves the capacity issue at all and creates other traffic flow problems. I don't know how we can function as a legislature without a place for press conferences, and I'm having trouble thinking large enough would be the chamber, the House chamber, which we've already given to other uses. It probably would be hard to schedule it for a press conference. I'm just having trouble.
How about the auditorium in the pavilion?
Well, but we don't control that space.
Right.
We can't say,
But we talked about using that space.
yeah, sure, but we can't just say bump the governor, for example, but from.
Yeah. And there are options to get around the Cedar Creek room, which we all use because all of us are legislators. All of us are trying to get to the cafeteria or somewhere. But I mean, we can go up under, and there aren't that many press conferences, and particularly this next year, I think they'll be limited. So if we limit the number and limit the number of people in them, I think that you could use the Cedar Creek room responsibly.
How does, and I'm not understanding how limiting the number of press conferences helps us. What we want to limit is the number of people
Right, either
gathered
way.
in a place.
Yeah, I don't care which.
And once you call a press conference, it's, as Butch pointed out, it's really difficult to limit the number of people who want to show up. It's a tough one. We can't use the cafeteria because press conferences often happen when the cafeteria is full of people.
Nat.
So the Cedar Creek room is about 250 square feet bigger than the lobby.
Right.
When we ran numbers for the lobby, we put it at about 49 people. As for fire code purposes, with a recommendation from the Sergeant at Arms of no more than 35 in the lobby. The number for the Cedar Creek room, again, fire code wise, was 65. And our recommendation was no more than 45. We can do some things in that room to improve the traffic management. We can throw stanchions up and basically bullpen off the side of the room to allow a free flow of traffic between the two doors. The other thing that we could do is restrict the timing of press conferences being before 11 and after 1, something along those lines, to keep that room free flowing during that peak travel period of the day. Those are just some options.
Right.
I don't advocate really much of any of them, but those are some options for consideration.
Did we make a recommendation that whomever wants to schedule a press conference needs to work with the Sergeant at Arms in terms of the operation of the press conference and for ensuring flow of the public through that room while the press conference is in session?
Well, how does that relate to limiting? I mean, I like the idea of limiting the number of people, and I know it's difficult to do, but the Sergeant of Arms could say, okay, you're reserving Cedar Creek room. We recommend no more than 12 people be part of your presentation. I know it is tough to do, but I think it's hard to say you can't do them. It's really hard.
But if you limit the number of people, just in the Cedar Creek room, if you limit the number of people at the press conference, and I want to get to my committee room, because, and the congestion, the issue happens more when we're on the floor, at least for me, that not the cafeteria, because I'm running from here and there, here to there. How does somebody know whether you're there for the press conference or you're there because you're trying to get to your committee room? I mean, it is.
The committee room, you would keep on going. You wouldn't stop.
You wouldn't sell. You do though, and you see it and you wonder what's going on and whatever. It's just, it's a hallway.
So Matt, when you say that you could bullpen them off, would that mean like you'd rope off a section for folks to be in the press conference, but then it keeps an open aisle or something open for people to flow back and forth? Would you split the audience of the folks who are listening in to the press conference in two different parts of that Cedar Creek room? With it open in the middle, a hallway or path in the middle open? Or
Yeah, you could do that.
all on one area and then kind of rope off so that people could walk through?
I think if we stay down in that 45-person recommendation in that room, I think you could get them all on one side, but I do think that, you know, carving a hallway through there was not, it's not out of the question. That's very doable.
Is that something that we need to make a recommendation to Joint Management Committee? Or would the recommendation be more that the Sergeant at Arms works with the respective folks who are putting together the press conference to make sure that there is an aisle or a pathway for people to move freely through that are using Cedar Creek room as a hallway?
How about we encourage the Sergeant at Arms to manage press events in the Cedar Creek room to reduce occupancy and improve transient mobility.
Traffic flow.
Yeah, that's great.
Butch?
I was just wondering if we could just go with the language that we have, stay silent on press conferences and just instruct as Matt says, only less words.
I think we need to address press conference because that's, yeah, if we don't, we're gonna say, well, what about press conference? Joe?
And just let the Sergeant at Arms office handle with the flow and capacity. We're gonna do that.
Joe?
So I think we should give marching orders that outside entities not be permitted for this session to use Cedar Creek room for press conferences. That press conferences could only be called by members in the administration. I'm thinking about what normally happens in that room. I'm going from the Senate chamber to the cafeteria and there's a press conference going on. It's not unusual for me to stop dead in my tracks and listen to what's happening. And I think in the best of intentions, roping off an area, same clogging situation, because people are going to stop and say, oh, gee, what's this about? I'm hearing people that are uncomfortable losing the ability to walk through that space with freedom, but that space does have 2 exits. There are other ways to get from the Senate chamber to the cafeteria without having to go through that room if I don't want to. I just don't think we can avoid having press conferences, but we can limit who is able to call them. Another thing to throw into the mix is you could limit the amount of time that they take place. In other words, say to member X, yes, you can hold a press conference, you've got 30 minutes and the room is going to be evacuated at that point in time. Something along that line. But I'm real clear that outside entities should not be using during this upcoming session. Because press conferences can be held virtually anywhere, and we're trying to limit the amount of people in this building.
But those outside groups could connect with a member, and then the member would sign it.
Yeah.
That's what would happen. And we have a lot of new members that.
A lot of new
Would love to
members
do
who
that.
need to be trained as well.
Right.
in Understanding, and I'm not saying this to disparage anybody, but every single person who is working in this building has to have an understanding that we are desperately looking to do everything we can to limit the foot traffic in the building for the 2022 session. That's training.
Janet,
So I'm not sure that, you suggested just members and members of the administration. I'm not sure that the administration needs that space. They have
They have a gorgeous room.
They have a gorgeous room that, but I also agree with Alice that, advocacy groups know how to get a member to make the request. That may just be something we have to live with. I think if we make, I would be comfortable if we made a statement that said that we're discouraging use of the Cedar Creek room for press conferences, but not prohibiting it. Just,
It's a good compromise.
better not to do it.
I meant to add that I would not use the lobby at all because serving on Senate Judiciary, you would not understand how many times we get interrupted by what's going on in the main.
Right. Well, that's the challenge with more committee rooms down here too.
So what I'm hearing is we would discourage the use of the Cedar Creek room for press conferences in this interim 2022 session. And that, putting this out there, that the Sergeant at Arms we recommend the Sergeant at Arms would be handle the capacity and the traffic flow through that room. Matt?
I was gonna say, I think that if we had a little more encouragement to manage these things, we could.
Does this give you enough encouragement to do that?
I think as long as we have the encouragement and the backing, I think we're fine with it. Because the times that we've tried to manage it a little more, we got a little pushback. But I think we'll be okay with a little bit.
Pushback from the legislative arena?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes,
I mean, we need to know
I
that.
think you may still.
You probably will.
We may still, but as long as we have a, JLNC behind us that says, no, this is.
They may not agree to this. They
Well, they
may,
may not, but that's something we'll have to get from them to understand, okay, this is, these are your guardrails. Because we don't want to have to convene JLMC every time we have a question. We just need some guardrails.
well, I think also part of our recommendations may be that we highlight some issues that they're way beyond our purview, but that other entities need to really come up to the plate and make some kind of a decision. John and then Allison?
I'll say again, I don't think we can function as a legislature without press conferences, and to say that we're going to discourage the use of that room and not offer an alternative seems like, why would we say that? We're not discouraging press conferences, are we?
No.
Discouraging
But
that space.
so discouraging the use, then, but without offering an alternative, what are we saying? That's the same as discouraging press conferences.
Well,
So I don't like that wording.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I don't like that word.
I would agree. I would see a wall, but Alice, to go to Matt's suggestion, I mean, I would agree. I think discourage is not great, but I think you could say press conferences can be arranged with the sergeant at arms office.
End up with what we have.
And you're encouraged to limit participation.
And you're encouraged.
Encourage to limit participation.
Limit your participation, exactly. I think we can encourage limitation, but I think to say discourage is too negative. I think that's our space, and I agree with John. Otherwise, you have to come up with another space. So where do you encourage them? So I would say press conferences can be arranged with the sergeant at arms office, and we'll encourage.
Well, and I,
So the speaker uses the speaker's office sometimes. I know the president pro tem will use her office. So there are spaces. I don't think we need to designate every single space. I think all we want to say is we don't think the Cedar Creek room is an ideal place for press conferences this coming session. That's all. I don't think we need to come up with, there are other spaces that can be used.
Right, but I wouldn't use the word discourage for anything.
Well,
We
I don't
encourage
think anyone's
limitations
going
to press conferences held in the Cedar Creek room.
you what?
We encourage limitations to press conferences
I think
being
that
held
says the
in
same.
Cedar Creek room.
I could add,
You don't like it?
I was just gonna also
Could be.
say, if we are
Yes, that's
talking
right.
about coordinating with the sergeant at arms office, they can coordinate timing. So if someone has a press conference that's gonna be large, then hey, can you do it at 4:00? Let's do it in the cafeteria. Then we can accommodate your numbers. But if you want to do it at noon with 100 people, you're not doing it in the Cedar Creek room.
John just had a good suggestion.
Speak up.
I wondered if they could be held in the Snelling room with
Uh,
prior arrangements.
It's in the pavilion.
The more I think about it, the more I like it.
You've now pushed all of your student tours off to the Snelling room.
So Joe said the language we got, number 7, Cedar Creek room, not be used for presentations or receptions during the session because of issues with congestion and airflow. Leave it at that and not try to address press conferences.
I think when you start to delineate exceptions, you're going to be faced with having to make choices between who can call that and how many people will be in the room and how it will be monitored. If the intent is to limit foot traffic in the building, simply saying any presentation or reception, Cedar Creek room during the 22 session, just not a good idea. Makes perfect sense. You can call a press conference anywhere in the state of Vermont, but for now, the limited confines of this building require us to do something out of the ordinary. As much as we regret that, that's just a fact of life.
So what happens when one of us gets asked the question, what about press conferences? Cedar Creek room.
I'm happy to leave it to the sergeant at
I mean, the
arms.
sergeant at arms currently books all press conferences, currently tries to manage them. And one of the toughest things is Janet often does not get enough information to know whether it's going to be a big one or a little one. Because a lot goes on, once they've made the booking, a lot goes on to determine whether it's going to be a big one or a little one. So what I would do is encourage the sergeant at arms perhaps to get more information to whatever extent possible, because I think that really is the issue.
Right.
Is it going to be a huge advocacy thing in the middle of the pandemic, or can't we suggest that that type of press conference is frowned upon, that they in fact would be doing their cause harm by, behaving in that way at a time like this?
If you open that up, David, though, don't we subject ourselves to liability when one group gets excluded and the next group comes along and says, wait a minute, we only have X number and it's 5 less than what they were proposing, why
Yeah,
can't?
I'm not suggesting that you limit it. I guess I'm suggesting that you give the sergeant at arms some tools to allow her to suggest that it's just not a time for big ones.
I guess,
What about the sergeant at arms in consultation with joint rules? Doing something like that? Don't know.
I just guess that's where I come back to, the easy delineation, because, the whole content neutrality thing that I keep coming back to. The easy delineation is if you want to have a press conference with House Ways and Means for on behalf of House Ways and Means or whatever, you want to have a press conference, we'll book that. But for this next year that we don't book the Ducks Unlimited of West Berlin press conference. And again, I say that because I'm confident there's not one.
Right.
It probably is.
But to me, that's the easy delineation, is that the outside group press conferences, of which we have a gazillion
Yeah.
every year, we ask them to find another spot.
I think that's great and really that members get to ask. And it's clear if it's a member, members may or may not ask for other groups, but I think, I don't experience a lot of senators asking for outside groups. I just haven't, mostly it's for things we're promoting or bills that we've just passed, or
Members are different.
it's interior promotion of our own work. I just haven't experienced members asking for, so we could limit it to that.
And focus on advocacy groups, press conferences, basically. That's the undertone. But I can't imagine saying to the speaker or the pro tem, you cannot hold a press conference in the Cedar Creek room on an important issue like maybe
Yeah,
pension reform.
that would be great.
Your full caucus can't attend. So, and whether it's it doesn't matter. The
Or climate
Republicans,
change,
pardon me?
or climate change.
Climate change, any of.
I think we're all going to have to be thoughtful about numbers.
I agree. I agree. And I'm sure that leadership from all stripes will try to work with that until the end of the session, when these things usually start breaking apart. Everybody gets into their own camp.
Janet watching us?
Yeah.
What did she say? Hi, Janet.
Nation of internal votes.
Yeah. I just think that
Three watching.
legislative press conferences probably be more appropriate. Non-legislative press conferences may not.
So Matt, what does Janet Miller say?
Well, she just said that was on track with what she was thinking, that there's no way to, as Representative Shaw was saying, there's no way to say, no, I'm sorry, Madam Speaker, you can't have your press conference. But there is a pretty easy way to say, okay, legislative press conference is fine. External groups not fine.
Right.
Because that remains content neutral, because the minute you let one in and then I think you collectively as legislators have a better opportunity to manage your colleagues to go, not putting all 150 members of the House in secret for a press conference,
And we have to exercise our own thoughtfulness.
I bet when you, this is making me uncomfortable. The idea that you're gonna limit, you need to start telling environmental groups or people with disabilities that they can't do a press conference in the State House. What they're gonna do, they're gonna come to the State House. And they're gonna say, whether we're welcome or not, here we are. I just think it's asking for trouble to sort of provide the idea that you're limiting people's access to the State House. But if I were one of their organizers, I would say, well, next stop, the State House, they don't want us in the Cedar Creek room, they'll take us in the hallway. I think it's opening up a can of worms that makes us vulnerable to.
Or they'll work with some legislators that support and get them scheduled.
Well, no, I agree. See, if what we're saying is somebody comes to a senator and says, Senator Clarkson, could you reserve the Cedar Creek room for us? Because people with disabilities want to do press conference about, some bill or something. That, you're saying that would be okay? As long as it's arranged by a senator or?
So she,
That's what I think happens now most of the time. I mean, I've been asked numerous times to reserve Cedar Creek room for press conferences.
she just texted and recommending that cafeteria time and space be used for larger press conferences. So
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Maybe that's the way we do it for a large press conference. We encourage that they use the cafeteria.
They can't do it at noon, but they can do it.
Yeah, and that will limit the times too.
11 to 2 or something like that.
So to me, the discussion has been about the Cedar Creek room, not about press conferences. And I still think that we should discourage the Cedar Creek room for press conferences, whether we use that language or not. I think there are ways of accommodating the need to do press conferences. And I agree with you that as long as you tell people no, then you make it an issue to get a yes. So I don't think we gain anything by saying you can't have press conferences in the State House.
So what if we say Cedar Creek room should not be used for presentations or receptions, blah, 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 and then put in a new 8 and say, we encourage that the cafeteria be used for press conferences.
Why don't we just put press conferences in current 8? After presentation.
Sorry, Joe, I can't hear you.
Cedar Creek room should not be used for presentations, receptions, or press conferences
I didn't
during
read
the
number 8,
22 legislative session.
right?
But we can
And adding the
also say,
Nope, just, they will gravitate towards some other space that they recognize as
if the weather's
worthy of
nice,
their
the front
numbers.
steps.
Mhm.
I'm
I'm,
just concentrating on the Cedar Creek room being taken out of the mix for press conference purposes.
so the only thing I'd add to that is that press conferences must be arranged through the Sergeant at Arms office.
That's fair.
That's current.
Right, but I'd say it explicitly because they'll know all the spaces that are available.
And I think the differentiation is if I want to gather 3 cameras in the lobby and talk to them, I can do that.
Sure.
At any time, any day, whatever, as long as I don't interrupt the Senator series. But if I want to hold a formal press conference with podium and the support that we offer those, then that has to be booked.
Right, but I think it's,
That's the way it works currently.
So in 8 for Alan, I think there needs to be some splitting up of these sentences. So the first one would be presentations, receptions, and press conferences during the 22 legislative sessions should be held in the cafeteria, period.
Well,
Because you can't limit it to one presentation or reception in the morning.
Cafeteria or other appropriate spaces, maybe.
I'm just looking at the makeup of this sentence first. We're saying that press conferences should be in the cafeteria. We don't want to limit a press conference to 1 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon. That part of the sentence is for presentations and receptions. Okay, so that sentence has to be broken up. So do we want to make a statement? Press conferences should be scheduled through a legislator
no,
or not?
I would not.
Okay,
I would
okay,
just really focus
okay.
at the Sergeant at Arms.
Well, we know that they have to go through the sergeant.
Right.
Sure.
And I wouldn't say anything else about who they could go through.
Because we don't want to be perceived or in
Should we
reality
say the
we're
press-
changing press conference, the format of press conferences.
Right, do we want to say the press conferences should be scheduled through the sergeant at arms?
Yes,
yes.
Okay,
I would.
and
Say
then,
I'm just,
So we take the language that's in 9 and just work that around so that we have a similar language for all that.
let Ellen figure that one out. Then we want to still limit the presentations and receptions to 1 presentation or reception in the morning and 1 in the late afternoon to the cafeteria. Correct?
And Alice, can we just clarify what presentations are? I mean, are we talking about school groups as a presentation?
No.
Are we,
Now, school groups are in the next paragraph.
so who's included in a presentation?
That's the card room
But what page is it?
piece, isn't it?
So we weren't doing any this year.
Steve?
Sometimes we've seen school groups show up, especially private school groups. Maybe they're doing some advocacy and the students do a presentation.
Oh, right, that kind of thing.
That sort of, that, in my mind, in reading that's not a school tour. That's not a.
And it's not a press conference.
It's not a press conference, but there's a
Right.
group that's come up and they want to show their posters to all the legislators that walk by.
Or sometimes there's a function in the cafeteria where somebody's getting an award
Right.
and they're using, that's a presentation.
And when we do the historic preservation presentations, all that, do we really want to not have any of those
You're
there?
probably not going to be doing them, but that's a very micro thing.
We made this decision way back that we would limit this to 1 in the morning and 1 in late afternoon.
I think that was right.
Yep,
That's still a lot. I mean, that's 2 every day.
Right. So we made that decision.
right.
Okay.
So then, but then I thought we just said no presentations in the Cedar Creek room.
But the cafeteria
Said
is
the
8.
cafeteria.
They're in the cafeteria.
They're in the
Oh.
cafeteria. We've got to reword that number 8. Okay?
So but just to go back to our discussion about what the Cedar Creek room is going to be used for, what are we going to use the Cedar Creek
It
room
would
for?
not be used for presentation or receptions.
It's used to get from the committee rooms to. the
It's
house
not, it's
floor.
more than a hallway.
No, I know, I'm joking.
I think we were concerned way back when we first started working about really trying to keep the spaces that we have open for movement of traffic. That was the card room, that was the Cedar Creek room, to really vacate those rooms of a lot of activity because that's where the congestion is. That was a discussion that we had the first, second, and third meeting.
Yeah, no, I remember.
And so that's why the card room, we have said presentations, display tables, no longer in the card room because we wanted that flow. The Cedar Creek room, we had that feeling, we had not addressed what we were doing with press conferences. We knew we didn't want the receptions in there because that blocks up the traffic. And we thought that the more you can move people in the building, the better you are with air quality and airflow. Joe?
So the Cedar Creek room should not be used for presentations, receptions, or press conferences during the 22 legislative session because of issues with congestion and airflow in that room. That's a pretty clear statement. It takes care of the press conference issue. You're not designating where they should be because you can call a press conference on the State House steps.
Right.
It doesn't matter. There are places in the building that could be used, but any press conference that needs to be called should be done so through Sergeant at Arms. The cafeteria, I was hearing Allison, you talking earlier about the late afternoon. I'm only going to suggest there should be one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and one in the evening. Because you don't want to leave the impression that an afternoon precludes the evening hours. For instance, we have, it's not Ducks Unlimited, who comes in the evening?
Sportsman.
Sportsman's caucus.
That should be allowed, but we don't want to limit it to 1 in the afternoon because then you're blocking anything in the evening.
Right. And the lieutenant governor's films have been at night, and there are actually quite a few things at night.
I'm gonna make a slightly different suggestion, is that we say 2 receptions a day. And we don't specify what time of day they're gonna happen. I think we need to remember that things are not gonna be normal next year. And the more we're clear, our statements support that, the more people are gonna be willing to accommodate the different way of operating that we're gonna have to put in effect. I mean, if we try to make everything look the way it's always looked, pretty soon we're not gonna be able to function within the strictures that I think we're gonna have. So 2 a day seems like enough to me. I don't care what time of day they are. 3 seems a little more than we need.
2 presentations or receptions a day.
Why would you want to have empty space?
Because we need to keep people out of the building. I
Even at
think.
night?
generally the message needs to be that there need to be fewer people in the building. I think.
John?
Seems like limiting the number unless there's a really good reason, like you've got to clear the air out, there's not enough ventilation, it's indefensible. It just doesn't make sense. How, where do we come up with that? Why not one? Why not five? Why two? It's just totally not defensible.
So we're on number 8, page 10.
Technically, it's number 9.
I know, but what we see is number 8, I know. We made the decision that we would limit in the morning to one reception or presentation. And that could include the side table there, that would include the side table. We were trying to get away from, we had something in the card room in the morning, then we have something up in the cafeteria. Sometimes there may be press conference going on in the Cedar Creek room, and it's hard to move people through and everybody feels congested and there's no space in the State House. The same thing in the late afternoon. We had conversations, there's receptions in the Cedar Creek room, and at the same time, there's a reception in the cafeteria. And things are jammed up. Legislators can't move through the hallway and feel we don't have enough space in the building. That's why we made the recommendation in 8 that we did. Matt.
So I'm getting a text in from Janet. We wanted to make sure that we remembered that, we just talked about shoving press conferences into the cafeteria, but we should not confuse the events that happen in the cafeteria with the events that used to happen in the card room, because then everybody in the card room will cancel and want the cafeteria space. Cafeteria's events are typically paid for, paid to the,
That's the other piece, yes, paid to the cafeteria.
yeah, them. And,
Heavy group.
the limitation of that is almost self-limiting, that you really only have that one sideboard in the morning and then maybe a reception in the afternoon. But that perhaps, you don't want press conferences quite into the same group with the presentations and stuff. Let me see, I'm sure that was all she wrote. Sorry. Yep.
Press conferences could also, small ones, could be easily done in the space we have just liberated, which is the space outside the cafeteria. Where the couch is. I mean, we could do small press conferences there with no problem. And maybe we should.
One of the, and I'm sorry for the chaos grenade, but one of the things that I've long wanted to copy from DC are designated press stand spots.
No, we're not going there.
Because when we get down towards the end of session, we are tripping over tripods moving around the building and trying to do exactly what you're talking about making those spaces
Designate them.
and designated has been something I've longed for, but it's not, today's not.
So, okay, committee, where are we in terms of number 7? We were Cedar Creek room should not be used, presentations, receptions, press conferences during the 22 legislative session because of issues, blah, blah, blah. Number 8, we were going to wordsmith that to say presentation, receptions, and press conferences during the 22 legislative session should be held in the cafeteria. Press conferences should be scheduled through the Sergeant at Arms office. In terms of one, for the presentations or receptions, we had said we would limit one presentation or reception in the morning and one in the afternoon. And we wanted to make sure that the presentation receptions included the side table in the morning. Then it was put on the table, should we just say 2 presentations or receptions per day? And not delineate one in the morning and one in the afternoon.
Joe had suggested 3.
I suggested
Morning,
3,
afternoon,
one
and evening.
morning, one afternoon, one in the evening.
So 3 receptions PowerPoint presentations a day. And be silent in terms of, do we have 2 a day in the morning, 2 in the morning, and 1 in the evening? 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, 1 in the evening. See,
I think just at the end of that to be managed by the sergeant at arms.
Yes,
And then
exactly. I'd just leave it with Janet and let her manage it. She knows what our objective is.
so are we at 2 or 3?
3.
Two.
Three.
I can- Again,
So if you have 3 and there's 2 in the morning, where does she put the second one? If you have the sidebar and then there's another one, where do you put it?
She
well,
said
she's not going to do that.
she'll figure it out. I mean, that's,
Poor Janet, I'm glad I'm not her.
I mean, I think she controls the space. I mean, she knows what's going on where. I mean, I think they're the perfect person to oversee this.
Tuesday morning or Friday afternoon. I mean, there are things that we can't address in here.
And I think there are some self-limiting factors. You know, the cafeteria is not going to be able to support, 17 sideboards and feed me breakfast too, so.
So are we at 2 or 3?
3, I think, because that leaves the evening open as an option.
I'm at 2.
I wouldn't want to have all 3 at the same time.
But Janet will manage that. There won't be 3 at the same time.
Oh, there very well could be. There very well could.
But that's Janet.
Well, but remember, you've taken Cedar Creek out of this. So unless they're coming down here for a reception in the Lincoln hallway, which has happened, you're really only got one at a time.
So
Janet?
I think the receptions are great, but we can actually do our work without them.
Okay.
And so I think having receptions in the building is something that I'm good with doing, but I don't think it 3 is more than we need, frankly. I think we're fine with 2. I think frankly, we're probably fine with 1.
Yeah.
I'm remembering the lieutenant governors. I don't know if our current lieutenant governor is going to want to run events like the last one did. But it would seem to be really irritating if you're trying to do that, running that type of an evening program and you can't do it because there was a reception earlier in the evening.
Yeah,
That's one of the issues.
I think it just gets.
And I'm still having a real problem with no press conferences in the Cedar Creek room
Yeah.
because I don't feel like we've offered any alternative. Particularly when we start talking about the cafeteria, if there's a morning, some kind of gathering and people there and breakfast in the afternoon, there's sometimes during the sessions, there are receptions every day. And you can't do it during lunch. When are they going to do the press conferences? We don't know. And so the alternative, the Lincoln hallway or the front lobby, that's no better. That's worse than the Cedar Creek room.
Yeah.
Where are they going to be? Maybe they need to be in 109, but to say they can't be in the Cedar Creek room and offer no viable alternative makes no sense to me.
Which,
But John, I hear what you're saying, but to accomplish our goals, we may not be able to offer a viable alternative.
For a press
Because we
conference.
may not have a space.
So we just.
Oh, there's Janet. She's fine.
poor Janet.
Yes, I did.
Maybe we need to find a place that's not in the building and that will limit the number they go because you won't have people.
I like Allison's, the front steps.
What's 20
It'll
below?
limit the length of the press conferences for sure.
That would work.
There used to be, years ago, Baldwin, whatever street that is that goes out the side of the State House. I think it's Baldwin, right?
Baldwin Street.
WCAX had a building there, which
Right.
they later.
No more.
And that's where people used to
Care of
do
that.
conferences.
Oh, that's right.
Vince took care of that.
WCAX and say, I'd like to do a press conference, is your room available, whatever time and date, and other media would come there. And when they sold that building and WCAX stopped hosting press conferences, it was really a problem for advocacy groups. Because there's nowhere, I mean, I don't live in Montpelier, but around Montpelier a lot, there's nowhere to do a press conference in Montpelier. I mean, maybe City Hall occasionally, but there's just no real accessible place to hold a press conference. That's why people started coming more to the State House.
Janet's about,
I know.
it's about hit me in the back of the
I know.
head. We haven't talked about 4-H.
And or it can, or two acre, because we could either one. Extra room.
There's a place for you.
Or 133.
4 acre could be a great place for press conferences.
So we're
Nice big
through
room.
this press conference thing, and we're gonna take a break. And then we're gonna come back and go through our report line by line. Okay, folks? So Janet, welcome. Do you want to weigh in on this at all? Do you
Yeah, just-
care?
Yeah, can you hear me, folks?
Yes.
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 Oh, hi, everybody, and I'm sorry I couldn't be with you, but I was just kind of trailing along, and this just concerns me a little bit about what we just talked about. I'd be happy to do whatever I can to accommodate everybody in their press conferences, but I think unless we have a designated decision, like Matt said, I think the card room folks are going to want to book the side table just because it's a space, unless we're saying it's just a place to book through the cafeteria. So the cafeteria would lose out on that kind of cafeteria things that they do. I'm just trying to be careful of how I use my words, but I think we're going to need another space. I don't think we have enough space for the press conferences, no matter what. Like if we talked about putting them in that area where we were thinking about putting that room for Mike right outside the cafeteria, that's probably less airflow than the Cedar Creek room itself. So I think that would be bogged down, or would be too many people in that little square. So that wouldn't really work for a press conference, in my opinion. I mean, we could put a press conference in the cafeteria when it wasn't, if someone hadn't reserved it for a reception or a morning breakfast, we could fit it in at that point.
Allison?
So Janet, would you then suggest maybe we just do press conferences in one end of the Cedar Creek room, and go to Matt's suggestion, make sure it's roped off whenever there is one, and just limit the numbers to that section? Because the Cedar Creek room, I mean, despite what, it is a room with some airflow and a lot of space, a lot of air. I mean, it's got more space than place else.
I
We
think
just
that makes,
limit it.
I think that makes the most sense. We'll have to have a path. Oh, sorry, guys.
You said that makes the most sense?
I think so, yes. I think we'd have to have a path of egress in there, of course. And then whoever, unfortunately, not everyone can fit in there when there's a huge press conference anyway. And this will be kind of the thing we're going to have to be a little bit flexible, I think. I don't know.
So Janet, if there was going to be a very large press conference, say there's an advocacy group or whatever, even though a legislator may have requested it, but it's going to be a high volatile issue, could that press conference be held at 133?
That would be fine too, I think, because if everybody knows it's happening and the press will be there too, there's a place to put. Thinking, Matt, I'm thinking of that room, the large room that's in the front where there's not a lot of tables and desks in there. Do you think that would work? Was it?
The 133?
4 acre?
No, 133.
133.
Is it the one that nobody liked because it had the windows up high?
Yeah.
The
I mean, right. I mean, that only holds about, it only holds about 27 people, but if we do have a press conference, hopefully it's not going to be for a long time in there, right? So if we put a few more people in there, we're not exactly sticking by the ASHRAE numbers. We could do it there, and at least it would be a place for folks to be.
One of the drawbacks, though, if there are legislators that do want to attend that and they have mobility issues.
Yeah,
it's
very
difficult
true.
for them to get in that building.
Yeah.
That's
it's
correct.
Downstairs, right?
Yes. There were many bigger.
So we
What's that, John?
discussed the local issue moving from here to the other buildings, and if there's a serious contemplation of high utilization of those buildings, then we really have priced one already, so we understand what we would have to do.
Unfortunately, I mean, I want folks to come and I can understand Senator Polina, but I think this is a different year. I think, if we had the huge, large groups, it's just, we can't accommodate everything. I mean, we can accommodate in the cafeteria for up to 80 people or so. I'm not sure exactly where you folks landed on how many people can be in the cafeteria. But I mean, we could do a large press conference there. And would it be fair to say that people just have to have a time, like at 2:00 when lunch is over and a reception hasn't started, perhaps? Or we can't schedule a reception and a press conference within the same afternoon because it takes preparation to set up the reception too. We want to be fair to the people that are doing the work.
So I feel we've been around the barn and back.
Yeah.
I don't know where we are. Are we still, as a committee, keeping the press conferences to the cafeteria to let Janet manage and balance when we have receptions and presentations in the cafeteria?
Gosh, it's a lot of pressure on the cafeteria.
A lot of pressure on Janet.
A lot of pressure on Janet, but I'm thinking again about prioritizing. And press conferences are more connected to our business than receptions are. I mean, if I had to make a choice between them, I would choose the press conference over the reception. And
Right.
so I think it's important to remember why we're coming to this building, which is to do legislative work. That's why I think the standing committees get priority, it sort of moves down from there. And honestly, as I said, I like the receptions, but I think we could go through a whole session without them. We did last year.
Yeah. And press conferences are promoting our work.
Press conferences to me are, they're higher than receptions, but they're not as important as having legislators feel safe in the building and being able to do their work.
So let me play devil's advocate and say the Constitution requires that this be the people's house. The people do have a right to be here and participate and urge their legislators to do work. It's not limited to legislators doing work. We have a responsibility to keep people safe, to make sure that things run smoothly. But as long as people are acting in good behavior, they are entitled to be here. I can understand limiting presentations. It does not deny people from making presentations. It only subjects them to a list of somebody got there before I did. I'm looking at this language now and saying, well, a presentation and a reception, we're going to have 2 maximum per day. Well, one takes place Wednesday morning and the next one takes place Wednesday afternoon. How does Farmers Night fit into that picture? And I don't know the answer based on the language I'm looking at here, but I'm very troubled by it. I think we should have one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and one in the evening. And Janet is the authoritarian figure who gets to schedule what happens when.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're going to have a major problem.
Yeah.
Press conferences, are they a necessary component to the legislature? Sure, but they can be held literally anywhere. And I think saying that they can't be held in the Cedar Creek room is perfectly fine. I don't think we have to have a viable alternative stated in these recommendations. They can look to see if there's other space available and work through Janet to have that accommodated.
Right.
Just
And
my
I can just work on where I think those spaces could be, like in the Cedar Creek room, we could perhaps provide a small press conference. Is that what you're saying? Or outside?
Janet, we said that the Cedar Creek room would not be used for press conference.
Okay.
Presentations, receptions, or press conferences.
Okay, but when Senator Benning, when you were saying, it would be up to me to find a spot, where am I going to find a spot within the State House if we're keeping people moving, not congregating in hallways?
That will depend on available space.
Yeah,
And available space could include the Cedar Creek room if we came to that conclusion. But I'm not sure if you're going to make a decision that no press conferences should happen there, that you're going to see much of a change from what normally occurs. Because I know every senator walking through there to get to the cafeteria is going to pause for 30 seconds to see what's going on here at this press conference. You're going to end up with the same problem that you've always had. So either you're going to accept the fact that the continuation is going to be the norm, or you're going to block it altogether and suggest there has to be other space. That other space could be a Senate committee room that's not currently in use. There are other places in the building that may not be in use at that moment in time, the cafeteria being one of them. But trying to say that on hour X of day whatever, you're going to be able to predict space will be available at a given location, I think is going to cause you a lot of heartache. You should
Right.
have a daily ability to control where things are happening inside the building.
well, I agree with that. I think we can handle it, but I don't want people's expectation to be, I want a press conference on Thursday and you better find me a place because we may not have a place. Is there a caveat to
Yeah.
the wording that we could put in there based on availability?
Yeah,
Sure, I think that
Okay.
that caveat has to be there. It has to be based on availability and your ability to find that.
right.
Right.
And I think one of our early tenets in this committee was to be flexible. And I think that if there is a small press conference, Janet should have the ability to mark off part of the Cedar Creek room and let it be there. I don't really know why we're,
Said no to the
I know, but I don't know why we've said no. I mean,
Who said no?
who said no? We didn't vote on it? I mean, I just think,
we made that decision on 7, that the Cedar Creek room.
I don't think we did. I mean, I think a lot of us are wanting flexibility with the Cedar.
Did.
I thought we were really limiting presentations and receptions.
Yeah.
Not,
It doesn't say no press conferences.
I almost read press conference.
I read
about
press conference. I
15
read number
times.
7, Cedar Creek should not be used for presentations, receptions, or press
No,
conferences.
it doesn't say that or press conference.
Doesn't
That's what
say
she
that,
read.
but that's what I read in terms of picking up the conversation and discussion that people were putting on the table. So I read that. I didn't hear any disagreement to that.
No, I think a lot of us have felt we could do very small press conferences effectively there if we were able to screen it off
Okay,
and
let's,
manage it.
okay, let's take a break, folks, because we're going round and round in circles. And I think we need to get out of the room a little bit, clear our heads. It's 3:00. We need to go line by line through our report. Okay, and maybe the thing to do when we come back is start at the beginning of the report and start going through it.
Yeah, particularly with the